Welcome to the Fintech One-on-One podcast. This is your host, Peter Renton, chairman and co-founder of Lendit Fintech. Today's episode is sponsored by Lendit Fintech USA, the world's largest fintech event dedicated to lending and digital banking. Lendit's flagship event is happening online this year on April 27 to 29, with the possibility of an exclusive VIP in-person component. The verdict is in on Lendit's 2020 event that was held online, with many people saying it was the best virtual event they had ever attended. Lendit is setting the bar even higher in 2021. So join the fintech community at Lendit Fintech USA, where you will meet the people who matter, learn from the experts, and get business done. Sign up today at lendit.com/USA. Now, if you're wondering what happened to the Lend Academy podcast, it is still here. This is it, actually. We've had a rebrand. Fintech One-on-One is what the podcast will be called from now on. The reason we changed the name is that it better reflects what we are trying to do here. These are conversations, one-on-one conversations with fintech leaders. We have moved beyond the lending space, but that is not to say lending is no longer important. On the contrary, we will continue to have leaders in fintech lending on the show regularly. But Fintech One-on-One better encapsulates what we are trying to do, as we have many conversations with leaders that are outside of lending, such as this one today. Today on the show, I'm delighted to welcome Leigh Phillips. She is the president and CEO of SaverLife. Now, SaverLife are a national nonprofit. They're focused on helping people build financial security, and they do that in really interesting ways. They focus on a lot on gamification, ways to sort of gamify savings with their members. That's proven to be quite effective. We get into that in some depth. We also talk about what is the difference between people who are successful and not successful at really embracing their programs. We talk about the impact of the pandemic and how the members of SaverLife have been impacted much more than the typical person. We talk about how they interface with the for-profit community, and they have some pretty interesting programs there and much more. It was a fascinating interview. Hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast, Leigh.
Thanks, Peter. It's so great to be with you today.
Okay. I would like to get started by starting with some background. You've had a pretty interesting career looking at your LinkedIn profile, certainly not typical of the people I have on the show. So why don't you give us some of the highlights, particularly before you got to SaverLife?
Well, I'm glad to be an untypical guest. That's always fun to have different voices on the show. So I don't know what's interesting to tell you. I started my career working in nonprofits in fundraising, and because someone once told me that if you ever want a career in nonprofits, you should learn how to raise money, and then you'll always have a job, and that tends to be generally true. But then I actually connected with the San Francisco treasurer. He was recently appointed and was looking for someone to be his assistant. So I thought that sounded like an interesting job in City Hall at the time. I actually wanted to be a writer, and I thought I could support my writing career with my day job. That was kind of my thinking. But what I wasn't anticipating was that when I took that job in City Hall, that some very passionate advocates would come along with some terrific ideas around how to bank the unbanked, how to maximize tax credits. And, the city treasurer managing everybody's money for the city and county seemed like a logical place to launch some of those programs. So that's really how I got involved in this type of financial empowerment work, and went on to launch the San Francisco Office of Financial Empowerment for the San Francisco city government, and did a lot of kind of first of their kind programs there, again, focusing on financial systems, financial equality, and really how government can step in and ensure a more equitable financial system. So that was how I started out in this field, and was very lucky to have that experience and meet so many wonderful colleagues along the way.
Mm-hmm. So then what attracted you to SaverLife? Because it's been a few years now, but if you remember back to those early days?
So I've been CEO of SaverLife for about 5 years, but the organization itself has been around for 20, actually, since 2001. So we'll see our 20-year anniversary this year. And the organization was originally created under the name Earn, and was one of the best-known nonprofits focused on helping low-income families to save and build assets. So the kind of theory being that income alone isn't enough to move people out of poverty. It's really about wealth accumulation. So helping people invest in those assets that become, intergenerational, like homes that really help shore up families, like businesses, contribute to the economy, and of course, education. So that was kind of what the organization was focused on at the time. But I'm sure you'll remember, a few years ago, some data really started to emerge that's showing that liquidity and emergency savings was a really key part to family financial stability, right? So if you don't have money in the bank to withstand a financial emergency, or if you don't have money in the bank to withstand an interruption in income, then your ability to stay on track towards long-term goals was going to be very impacted. So the organization had decided to go down this path of looking at how they could leverage technology for scale. And in my former role at the city, I worked with Earn, now SaverLife, very closely. So for me personally, there was a couple of things that really prompted me to want to take on this new role. First was really understanding that kind of $500 problem, right? The fact that almost half of America doesn't have $500 in the bank. That's a pretty deeply entrenched problem and a very widespread indicator of financial instability. And so solving that problem and understanding how not being able to cover an emergency expense, let's say like a traffic ticket or something like that, really can create this downward spiral for families, right? So the ticket that becomes fines, that becomes a lost driver's license, that becomes a lost job, that becomes an eviction. So that kind of a trajectory, unfortunately, it was pretty common. So that was one issue I was really interested in. The second issue was really looking at the emergence of financial technology and how we were running the risk, and I think still are, of not building inclusive technology. And I know that's probably a topic that comes up on your show quite often. So, living here, I live in San Francisco, is kind of surrounded by a lot of innovation and obviously leadership in tech. But where are the voices of underrepresented people in these types of conversations, particularly as relates to finance? So I've been lucky enough to be on the advisory board of a for-profit startup called Level Money that went on to be acquired by Capital One. And I don't know anything really much about technology, Peter, at least not at the time. I've learned a few things over the years. But what I was able to understand is how some of this financial technology really could move the needle for low-income families, but only if it was going to be specifically applied to the problems that they faced. And I felt that nonprofits really had a shot at doing that, right? Because you don't have the same tensions around obviously having to have profitability and these other things. You can really design for the problem at hand. So that was kind of the second thing. And then the third, just as a woman and a leader, the opportunity to step up and be the CEO and was something that I felt that I needed to challenge myself to do. So those were kind of the three things that led me to leave a job I loved, working for local government, and step into nonprofit and tech, both of which were new to me at the time.
Right. So that's really interesting. I want to go back to something you just said there. And you said something along the lines, the financial technology companies, the fintech companies aren't really addressing this population, the people that really have trouble, making ends meet. And, obviously I've had many people on the show that are trying to do that. Where is fintech and how is fintech falling short?
It's a great question. And I think we still have a lot to learn. And, as well in the nonprofit kind of fintech sector, which I hope to see grow over the years. So the first is really understanding the types of problems that people face and how many of those problems are individual and how many of them, and what of those problems are systemic, right? So as a field, and I would say actually the nonprofit field also has focused too much on individual action and too much on individual behavior, right? So it's about what you do as a consumer and less so on those kind of prevailing other kind of systemic issues. So one example I can use is income volatility. So that's been an issue that's kind of come up over the years, that if you're looking at someone's income over a year, an annual household income, maybe you're seeing a number that doesn't look that bad, $35,000, $40,000 a year. But if that money has come into your bank account very inconsistently, $5,000 one month, $1,000 the next, then your ability to plan and stay on track towards long-term goals and your ability to avoid debt is really impacted. So organizations like SaverLife are able to look at that and say, okay, well, some of the rules around automatic payments and paying yourself first and the things that we hear a lot in the finance sector aren't necessarily going to be applied well to people who oftentimes don't have enough money consistently to cover monthly expenses, and maybe need to accelerate their savings during certain times of year, like tax time, for example, as opposed to focusing on some of these other ways of saving. The second thing, which I think is a challenge that we also face at SaverLife, is that for all of its innovation, financial technology is still largely built on mainstream banking. Uh-huh. So in order to participate in financial technology, you have to have a bank account, right? And you generally have to have a bank account that works well with financial technology, and that tends to be a bank account at a major bank. And so I think that we're kind of building these innovations, oftentimes around payments, around savings, around lending, whatever it may be. But if you're not already in that system, it's really hard for you to access it. So, probably you or I could go online right now and open bank accounts all over the place, right? In 5 minutes if we wanted to, because we're already in that system, right? Like we're recognized, know your customer, like all that stuff, like people know who we are. If you've been excluded from banking, or maybe you don't have that kind of banking history, it's going to be really hard for you to get started with some of these innovations. Mm-hmm. So, at SaverLife, we do see obviously a lot of folks who are banked and are able to use those products effectively. We also see a lot of people using alternatives. So we see a lot of people using things like PayPal as a savings account, which is kind of surprising in some ways. And then we see a lot of people who are unbanked completely, or maybe looking at prepaid cards and other things. And from a tech perspective, the connectivity to those types of accounts is just not the same. So I think that there's a number of things that really need to be solved, but they will only be solved if we actually put that as the end goal, right? Like, how can financial technology drive inclusion? Not, we'll do it if we can, but that really should be the end goal, so that we don't create a digital financial divide.
Right. And we certainly have the tools today. And I know that there are fintech companies out there that are trying to address the population that you've just talked about there. There's some new companies that I read about them almost on a weekly basis, it feels like these days, launching to either tackle a particular minority or a particular segment that's disadvantaged. But I want to get into what you offer, your program itself, and how. You've got a membership. You're a membership organization, I believe. So tell us a little bit about what you provide your members and how you encourage them to save.
So our goal at SaverLife really is to make saving money rewarding, engaging, and fun, and also to match what we do to the practicalities of people's lives, as I was just describing. So SaverLife at its core is rooted in price-based savings, pricing savings, match savings. So a lot of the ideas that came from things like match savings and other demonstrations of nonprofits over the years that we know to be effective, we're really trying to apply that at scale. So if you essentially join SaverLife as a member, if you link your savings account or your PayPal account or whatever you have, checking account, to save, we monitor net gains and savings. And then you can win cash prizes, in some cases receive cash matches, and so on and so forth. We do different challenges and pledges throughout the year. So right now our focus is really on tax time, right? Like, tax time is the moment when so many low-income families have this large infusion of cash. It's a pivotal moment. And so in that case, we start talking to people before they get those refunds. So we start saying, okay, this money is coming. Make a commitment to yourself to save. How much of your refund are you planning to save? And we have prizes to encourage people to pledge to save, to actually save, and so on and so forth. And we actually see quite remarkable progress when we do those types of things. So we have about over 80% of people who pledge to save their refund actually go on and do so, which is pretty significant. So again, it's kind of looking at, like, what are the triggers, what are the moments in time where people maybe have more liquidity in their finances and they can save. We also encourage people to save regularly and in small amounts. So maybe you can only save $5 a week. That's great. Save $5 a week. You can still win prizes and have other incentives for doing that. The second thing we focus on, which we're actually increasingly finding is very important for our members, is a sense of shared community. So you can access all sorts of different resources on the SaverLife website. So that includes financial content, the ability to ask an expert, content that's really well tailored towards people, our membership, and I can tell you a little bit about who they are. But also the ability to share with each other, to share in forums, to have discussions with other SaverLife members, to share your tips. And we really focus on a very uplifting brand, because a lot of personal finance can be kind of depressing or scary. So we really focus on celebrating people's wins and also understanding people's unique circumstances.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So are these prizes, are they random? Are they, when you hit a certain level, everyone gets a prize? I mean, how does it work?
It's mostly random. So it kind of depends on the challenge that we're running. So we have a scratch card game. So, you can earn points on the platform for engaging with financial content, for saving regularly, and you can redeem those points to play for prizes. We do savings challenges. So we found that helping people get above $100 in savings is actually a really important benchmark. So we have a lot of challenges geared around, can you reach $100 in savings within 30 days? And if so, you're entered in to win. That's another popular one we do. Same with the tax time pledges. We have story competitions, sharing your stories. Those are a little more like you're selected, based on the stories and things that you've submitted. So there's a bunch of different ways. Our goal is to keep it really engaging for folks and hope that we have a positive impact.
Right. And so is this, I mean, you don't have an app, right? Is this like just a web-based, is this all the web-based system?
Yeah, right now it's a web-based system. Hopefully having that app roll out this year.
Oh, okay. Great. So I want to go back to sort of a bigger question here, because I was reading something when I was doing the research for this interview. You wrote something, I think it might have been a couple of years ago, but you said that, people's problems will not be solved by rounding up spare change or smoothing out paychecks. So what is the way to solving, these, basically the systemic problems that we have in our society when it comes to, particularly, financial inequality?
Well, that definitely sounds like something I would say. So, here's the way that we see it. Improving your financial life, experiencing financial stability, and ultimately economic mobility, right? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for people to have the opportunity to save, to invest in themselves and their families in the ways that are meaningful to them, right? To be able to send your kid to college, to be able to live in the neighborhood you want to live in, to be able to start the business that you've dreamed of starting. And we know that there's a great deal of inequality within those systems. And we've seen that really highlighted in the last 12 months, right? As we look at the impact of the disparate economic impact of the pandemic. So what we believe is that you can achieve financial stability and economic mobility through a combination of individual action, so allowing people to take action today. And that's where savings money really comes into play, or, there's other personal things you can do. So helping people to take those individual actions, that's extremely important. But the other side of that really then is understanding and addressing those systemic barriers, right? So you're not going to, make your coffee at home and suddenly no longer be in poverty. And those are the types of messages that we put out there, that it's all about individuals, right? Like you've made bad choices, or maybe, there's a lot of judging, there's a lot of blame, a lot of shame that goes into this. And so I think the example you used about income smoothing is an interesting one. So is it great that maybe people can match, can cover unexpected expenses or loss of income with an app that allows them to advance their own pay or whatever the case may be? Yeah, and it seems like that works really well for some people, and that's a great innovation. But at the same time, if you're not looking at the question of why do so many people need that product, then you're kind of missing the point, right? And as nonprofit, as consumer advocates, that's where we really need to focus a lot of our energy. So then you're looking at what are the rules around fair scheduling for low-wage workers, right? Like what are the types of policy changes we can enact that reduce that type of volatility? Because that's what really gets people into trouble, right? Like you don't have consistency in your income, so therefore you have to go into debt to bridge those gaps. And then next month, guess what? You're worse off, because in addition to having volatility in your income, you're in a worse position than you were in before. Uh-huh. And so for us, we're really, and this is where I think financial technology can play a huge role, because you have so much data. We connect to people's, financial accounts to run our program. So that means we have a lot of insights into their financial lives. So again, as a nonprofit and as consumer advocates, we can look at the impact of policy on people's actual financial lives and bank accounts, right? Like you can look and see, for example, over the course of the last year, when stimulus payments go out from the federal government, who gets those payments? What stabilizing impact do they have on families? Do we see increases in savings? Do we see repayment of debt? We see increased spending on food. So you can actually look at and measure the impact of these things. And that's where, our work is really centered is where those things intersect, right? So where can you support people in taking action for themselves, but also where are the issues where, you're just not going to get ahead if you're paying more than 50% of your income in housing costs, for example, or your consumer debt is above a certain level. And those are largely systemic issues.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I want to talk about something that really what prompted this whole interview was someone from your office reached out to me with survey results you did, and it really piqued my interest because we've heard this year, and I've had people on the show say that, this year credit card balances went down, loan defaults were not nearly as bad as expected. In fact, many lenders had their best year in many years in 2020 as people were paying down their debt. But it struck me when that what hasn't been the case uniformly across the economy. And what you shared was the survey you did showed actually that not the population that you're focused on, it wasn't a good news for them. The stimulus checks may not have had the impact they had in other populations. So maybe you can just take us through some of the results of that survey that really show the impact of the pandemic on the people you serve.
Let me tell you a little bit about those people and who they are. So sometime, I think this week, we'll hit our 500,000th member. And 82% of our members are women, about 60% are people of color. Average incomes between $25,000 and $35,000 a year. Most of our members are mothers with dependent children in female-headed households and who don't have college degrees. So that's a little bit about the population. They're distributed across the US. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at who was economically impacted most by this pandemic, these are the people, right? Like low-income working women of color with dependent children. And there's been a lot out there recently in the media, obviously, about the impact of the pandemic on women, but particularly on low-income women. So you're looking at people who almost 60% of our client population, Peter, experienced unemployment during 2020 for some period of time, many of them for many months. And there's multiple reasons for that. So when the pandemic hit, it also hit very suddenly, right? So unlike other recessions that maybe have that impact a little more gradually, one day you were working and the next day you were not, and you have no idea when you were going to return. And that kind of sudden loss of income for millions of people in this country was devastating. And so you saw organizations like ours, like SaverLife and many others, raise money and step in and actually send people cash. And that was one of the first things that nonprofits with a fintech platform were able to do. And some of our for-profit friends also did some of this work as well. So we stepped in and said, okay, people have just lost all of their income. We know they don't have much of a savings cushion. They got kids to feed and rent to pay. Like, what can we do? So we sent out cash. And we recognized that the government would hopefully then kick into gear and start providing some relief. So as you mentioned, I'm also having those conversations with people who are saying, wow, it's amazing. The savings rate has gone up to whatever it is now, 16%. Consumer debt's gone down, but not for everybody. And I think that's really important, that if you look at these numbers in the aggregate, maybe you're seeing a situation like, yeah, unemployment's high, but maybe it's not that high. And for some people, some groups, it's 60%. And for other groups, it's 5% or less. So I think that the disparity is really what we're looking at, and why it's so important that you don't just look at everyone as a whole, right? That you look at these different populations and the impact. So what we've seen is interesting. So we definitely saw people still saving because people know it's important to do that. There's so much uncertainty right now. So when stimulus checks did hit, we did see savings, but we also obviously see people covering basic necessities. Then over the summer, you had the impact of unemployment insurance that was covering for people. But it's around August to December that you really start to see things get shaky for folks, right? So you see these increased withdrawals from savings and increased debt. I think credit card debt's up about 44% at the end of last year compared to the year prior for our client population. So again, that one side of it has been, on the income side, has been devastating. The second thing that we've been looking at is expenses, right? So for a lot of us, we're maybe spending less, right? We're not going on vacation, we're not eating out, we're not buying our coffee, we're not doing all those things. But for lower income folks without a lot of discretionary income, well, they weren't really doing those things anyway to begin with. And they also have increased expenses. And a lot of that's been the cost of food, the cost of utilities, internet access, and school supplies. So you're looking at food in particular has been a major driver. So families who may have had their kids in school receiving school meals or childcare receiving meals that way now suddenly have mouths to feed, all day long. Same with utilities, and maybe you would have spent most of your day out of the home. And if you live somewhere where it's really cold, then you've seen those things increase. So it's been a double whammy. And then the third piece of that, as I mentioned, is the impact of school closures. Mm-hmm. And so, we've heard a lot at the end of last year when they were debating around renewing unemployment insurance and other things. Well, will that discourage people from returning to work? I said, well, here's something that will discourage you from returning to work: not having childcare for your 5-year-old. Right. Right. And so the kind of disconnect between policymaking and the reality of people's lives was actually quite, alarming to us. So that's why I've been really focused. Again, technology gives you so much information and so much data. How can we use that data to really inform the conversation and to really look at, this is what people are really experiencing. We're about to put a report out in a couple of weeks about the impact of the pandemic on parents whose kids are not able to go to school. Huge earning loss, and at the same time, increase in expenses. So, those are the types of things that through technology you can really measure, right? Like you can look at where people are spending their money. You can look at what happens when they get government relief. You can look at what happens with their income, and you can help inform policymakers about how to build better systems. And I'd love to see more fintechs getting involved in that.
Right, for sure. So then speaking of that, like the for-profit fintechs, which obviously that's the biggest part of this vertical, shall we say? I'd love to know: are you working with some of the fintechs directly, or how do you interface with the for-profit fintech community?
We are actually. Some of our most successful partnerships are with other fintechs, and there's a lot of them that we really admire, and a lot of leaders in that space who are genuinely trying to help and do the right thing. So one partnership that's very valuable to us is with Propel and their Fresh EBT app. I'm not sure if they've been on your show. And they really, to me, exemplify kind of best in class about how this can all work together, right? So they solved a problem for folks that was really needed to be solved, right? Not knowing how much money you have to spend on food. They've been very creative in helping people use that technology to budget their food. And they've also stepped up in times of crisis to really help folks. So we have a partnership with Propel where we run ads for SaverLife through their platform, and it drives a huge amount of traffic. And it's very valuable to us because it's a similar target demographic of who we're trying to reach, not just in terms of income and challenges saving money, but also in terms of tech savvy, right? So it's a population of folks who are already using technology. And that type of referral partnership really helps us because it allows people to take action in the moment, right? You can see something, an ad for SaverLife, and be like, I'm going to do that now. As opposed to, while I'm waiting here, at the grocery store, I'm on the bus, whatever, maybe I'll just sign up and see what this is all about, as opposed to maybe if you've seen a flyer or a billboard or something you plan on doing later. So we've had a partnership with them. We worked with another app called Steady, which helps people connect to gig employment. That was really successful. We referred some of our members to Steady if they're looking for opportunity to increase their income, earn some more money. And then also offered that opportunity for Steady members to join SaverLife. And that was a partnership that the Financial Health Network supported. So we could experiment with cross referrals and prizes as a way to incentivize those cross referrals. So if you signed up for both platforms, you were able to be eligible to win a prize. And actually, I'll tell you, Peter, that we ran that experiment with them at the end of last year. And there was a $5,000 grand prize for someone who had signed up and used both platforms successfully. And we contacted the woman who had won, as a woman in Central California, and told her that she'd won this $5,000 prize from SaverLife and Steady. And she told us that she had just been served an eviction notice that week.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah. Wow. So she was able to stay in her home. That's great.
Right. It was 2 weeks before Christmas. She had 2 young kids, and
oh my God,
was able to stay in her home. So that was That was a great ending.
Yeah, that really is. You can't get a much better ending than that. Okay, so we're almost out of time, but a couple of things I really want to get to. What is the difference of the people that are on your platform? You said you're coming up to 500,000. I'm sure there are some that are that are really engaging with you well and some that are not. And I mean, what is the difference between those people that are successful on your platform and those that are not?
That's a really great question. And it's definitely one that we're always endeavoring to find out more about, right? So it's a combination of things. So we know that people who engage with the platform, the content, play the prizes and the challenges, tend to save money and, obviously at higher rates than those who don't. We also awarded a $10,000 prize at the end of last year to a super saver of the year as someone who had done all of the things and had increased their savings significantly. So I think there's a couple of things. I mean, I think there's, how ready someone is to save, how much, flexibility they have in their finances. Do you even have $5 a week or something, to save? Whether or not you have access to a savings account. We definitely see people who have dedicated savings accounts to move money into, as opposed to trying to grow a balance in a checking account, are more successful. So there's definitely some issues there that we're exploring. We did a fun experiment as well around goal setting and text messaging. So we tried out a couple of different personas around different types of text messages. And we had three personas. One was Mother Teresa, who had a very encouraging tone. One was Mr. T, who not everyone who works for me knows who that is because they're not as old as me. But he is, you can imagine, had a little more of a direct tone.
Yes.
And then the third was Michelle Obama, who had more of an empowering tone, like, we can do this, let's prove them wrong. Turns out that Mother Teresa had a negative impact on savings. Mr. T was neutral, but Michelle Obama increased people's savings rates by 34%. Now, just to be clear, this was not the real Michelle Obama.
Yeah,
this was
right.
Our interpretation of what Michelle Obama would tell you if she was going to give you savings advice, but a 34% increase in savings compared to the other groups. So we're very into kind of experimenting with those types of things to see how they move the needle. But as we've been talking about, Peter, I think the next phase for us is to really understand those systemic barriers, right? So 64% of people, somewhere in there, who join SaverLife have less than $100 in savings when they join. So what we're really looking to do is to move people up that trajectory, to move them from less than 100 to more than 100 to more than 250 to more than 500. That's kind of what we're focused on. And so we need to understand, obviously, behaviorally, what moves people up. So empowering text message from Michelle Obama, signing up for a savings account, automatic savings, playing the games, the challenges, all that stuff is relevant. But on the systemic side, we also need to understand you could do all of those things, but if your debt is too high or your income is too volatile or your housing cost burden is too great, it's not going to help you much, right? So how can we then attack this from both sides, both individually? This is what makes people successful. Let's do more of that. That's great. But then systemically, here are where the real issues are. And that's what we're hoping to continue learning about and solve.
Right. Okay. I also want to know then, how are you funded? Who is backing you? Do you have a bunch of foundations? You said you learned how to raise money. So tell us about how you're operating the money that you're operating with.
So SaverLife is a 501c3. We're a nonprofit organization. So we are largely funded from corporate and foundation philanthropy. So some of our big funders include MetLife Foundation, Prudential, JP Morgan Chase, Capital One, Intuit. There's a lot of folks on that side, some family foundations, some individual giving. So that's kind of what makes up the bulk of our revenue. And, there's a great interest in these types of issues right now. Obviously, we know that financial health is kind of an underpinning issue, right, for everything else. It indicates your, physical health, your ability to have stable housing, how well kids do in school, whether or not you can go to college. It's kind of the bedrock of so many things. We're also, of course, seeing, as we should, a great increase in interest in closing the racial wealth gap and the gender wealth gap. So specifically focusing on these, again, systemic issues and how they've impacted people now for many years. And let's actually address them, let's actually solve them. So that's where we kind of see this interest from philanthropy, which has been great. We do also have a program called SaverLife Solutions that offers our technology to employers, credit unions, other nonprofits, and people who want to run match savings programs, pricing savings programs, and use our technology. So we do have some earned revenue that comes in from there.
Great. Okay, so last question. I mean, I feel like someone like yourself has to be an optimist dealing with, challenging. These are really challenging problems, and many people are struggling like never before. So then, I'd like to kind of get a sense of how optimistic. Like, are you optimistic about the future? I presume that's a yes, but what do you see changing that is really going to bring, to have this problem? So when we do a survey in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, there's not going to be 60% of the population that can't make a $400 emergency payment.
Yeah, I was interviewed recently about leadership, and I think one of the questions was, what's a trait that you need to be a leader in this field? And optimism was actually what I said, because these are big challenges, right? And they're deeply entrenched challenges, and sometimes it can feel that you're not making a lot of progress. But I'll tell you what gives me optimism is the resilience and the optimism of the people who use our platform. I mean, that's where we draw on every day. I mean, they're the heroes of this story, it's not us. And so seeing what people do, and especially, the mothers on our platform, and the lengths that people go to improve their situations, to improve their families' situations, to take care of their kids, especially in the last 12 months. We have some great stories coming out. And by great, I mean, because they demonstrate, resilience about the impact of the pandemic on women or on working mothers, and just, people changing jobs multiple times, and, people being relentless and trying to get resources for their families. And that's what I think where the real optimism comes from. I think that where I see some change is really, again, and we'll always be pushing on this, that it is about individual action and collective action, right? So how can we both support people individually, but then also make sure that their opinions and their needs are represented in policy conversations, and that those people themselves are mobilized to go out there and demand more from our leaders. And I think that that's where we're actually seeing momentum now. Obviously, there's a new administration. There's a lot of policy ideas on the table that are things that we've been interested in or fighting for a long time. And so I think the more that we can come together and say, you know what, we need to put our values first. If we want an inclusive financial system, we need to build an inclusive financial system, right? We can't just say we want one. And that involves everybody in the ecosystem. It involves nonprofits, it involves mainstream banks, it involves financial technology, it involves regulators. So really, what is the world we're trying to create? And that's what work backwards from there. And I think that we can do it. I've also been serving on the Consumer Advisory Board of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a lot of energy, again, coming out of that agency, and how we can really make sure that we're putting people first. And I think we've learned a lot over the last 12 months that hopefully we will no longer ignore. All
right. Well, let's hope so. Leigh, it's been great having you on the show. I've learned a lot, and I think the listeners will as well. It's a noble cause. I'm glad there are people like you out there sort of fighting this fight, because it's really important, and I can see that you're making a difference. So thanks very much for coming on, Leigh.
Thanks so much for having me and for highlighting these important issues.
Okay. See ya. I'm also optimistic about the plight of these underserved consumers, the consumers that are struggling today. I feel like we have programs like what SaverLife is doing. We have a lot of the fintech companies that are now focusing on this segment of the market, much more so than even 3 or 4 years ago. And we see many different programs, a lot of them that offer automation, that offer really inexpensive financing, and really trying to get away from the predatory lending type products. We see automation happening with savings. I feel like there's lots of different ways that fintechs and nonprofits are attacking this problem. So I'm hopeful that really this decade we will make a real dent in the plight of these people who have been struggling historically. Anyway, on that note, I will sign off. I very much appreciate you listening, and I'll catch you next time. Bye. Today's episode was sponsored by Lendit Fintech USA, the world's largest fintech event dedicated to lending and digital banking. Lendit's flagship event is happening online this year on April 27 to 29, with the possibility of an exclusive VIP in-person component. The verdict is in on Lendit's 2020 event that was held online, with many people saying it was the best virtual event they had ever attended. Lendit is setting the bar even higher in 2021. So join the fintech community at Lendit Fintech USA, where you will meet the people who matter, learn from the experts, and get business done. Sign up today at lendit.com/USA.